stopping by once again, second time this week. We are thrilled to always have him here on this program, whether it's to call in or sit in this chair when I'm not able to. NFL Media Group, NFL Insider, our friend Tom Pelissero back here on the program. How you doing, Tom?
Probably better, I think, like a lot of people, than a couple of days ago when we talked.
No doubt.
The news with Demar Hamlin, how that's upended so many different things, and how terrifying that experience was, and so to just keep hearing the updates and how quickly it's progressed in a positive direction to the point that he's addressing his teammates on FaceTime today and flexing at them. I'm thrilled. I'm so surprised at how quickly it's gone, but I'm thrilled that it's headed this direction.
Me too, brother. Me too. No doubt about it. As he's flexing on his teammates and Sean McDermott, and just seeing him smile. Seeing the smiles out there. Now I'm looking at footage on our network right now on NFL Now, and just seeing both teams working out. I didn't know if we'd see it this weekend. Quite frankly, I really didn't know if I would see it this weekend. So I'm glad that we are.
No question.
If you think about it.
I think that, for the Bills, you have to also be, in a completely different state of mind than you might have been a couple of days ago.
Yes.
If you were still, at this point, asleep, for lack of a better term, sedated, and, those lingering questions. And obviously, he's still got a long road to go. As far as I'm aware, he's not yet been upgraded from critical condition. But just seeing that and knowing someone that you saw, quite literally die before your eyes and be brought back to life, to be 3 days later, and he's saying I love you, and want to know who won the game. I mean, it's an unbelievable story, and now the attention, as it always does, flips back to football, and I would certainly expect that the Bills are going to be in a lot better frame of mind than they might have otherwise been.
No doubt. Okay, Tom Pelissero, let's jump into it. Tom Pelissero here on the Rich Eisen Show, Mercedes-Benz Vans phone line. What can you tell me about the NFL and competition committees deliberations that spat out a very, deeply detailed and confusing set of circumstances as to seeding and who plays who, what, and potentially where? What do you got for me on that, Tom?
Well, our NFL research colleagues sent out the permutations last night of the playoff seeding. It's like a 3-page color-coded thing that almost looks like one of those Magic Eye posters.
I'm holding him up right now, Tom.
But in terms of,
I'm holding him up right now. I printed him out.
In terms of these, the potential modifications, which owners started their meeting about 25 minutes ago, they're actively, engaging with it. It really came down to trying to create some form of equity in a very rare situation where you did not have every team play the same number of games. And Troy Vincent said it on a conference call the other day that they would lean on the guiding principles from COVID, where there was no game lost during COVID. They played every game over 2 years, but the plan was to go with what the policies and the bylaws say, which is if you have an uneven number of games and there's a cancellation, that you go off of winning percentage. So if it were strictly winning percentage, then this would be very cut and dried, which would be the Chiefs would be able to lock up the number one seed, home field advantage through the playoffs in a first-round bye by beating the Raiders on Saturday. They still can wrap up the number one seed and the bye, but the NFL and the competition committee tried to figure out a path forward where the Bills or the Bengals are not disadvantaged in terms of needing to go on the road for a potential AFC Championship matchup. On top of that, then, you also have another unique situation where had the Bengals lost that game on Monday night that did not end up getting completed, then the Ravens could have won the division by beating the Bengals on Sunday. They would have swept them, so they would have the head-to-head tiebreaker. Now that opportunity doesn't exist, but in the NFL's telling, because the Ravens could have swept the Bengals and then not won the division with a chance to have the same record if the Bengals had played all their games, that then they would, in the event of a wild card playoff matchup, and only wild card playoff matchup, decide home field advantage by a coin flip. So part of what the NFL and the competition committee were examining, from what I was told, was how important really is home field advantage. They know that it's important to the clubs. They know it's important to the fans. But if you go back over the past 4 postseasons, there have been 44 playoff games, not including the Super Bowls, which, of course, are always in a neutral site. Of those 44 games, 24 were won by the home team, 20 were won by the road team. Last year, both the Bengals and the Rams went on the road to win 1 or more games in order to get to the Super Bowl. The year before that, the Bucs won 3 road playoff games and ended up, of course, winning the Super Bowl, which oddly enough was in their home stadium. So it certainly is something that's important to a lot of people, but not important enough for them to completely upend the entire schedule. If there were a game, if that Bills-Bengals game had decided whether one of those teams or someone else was in or out of the playoffs, that would have been different, but it did not bear on that. The same teams would make the playoffs regardless. If they shifted everything back by a week in order to make up this Bills-Bengals game next week, now you're impacting all 14 teams that are in the playoffs. And the league wanted to make these decisions prior to Week 18, so everybody's on the same page. You're not making the decisions after you see what happens in the games. And to the extent that some teams, these things might factor into whether they play their starters or how they game plan, all those different things, you at least have that information going into the weekend. We also know the Bengals are not happy about this because there is no provision to do this in the league's bylaws. It's supposed to be, again, going back to the COVID guiding principles, it's supposed to be winning percentage. So the league and the competition committee trying to do the right thing here. It's not a surprise that not everybody is going to be thrilled with this setup. I sense that from the people I talked to last night and this morning, there's a lot of people who think in a really unusual and frankly unfortunate situation, even though it appears Demar Hamlin is going to be okay, this is maybe the best of the kind of middling types of options relative to some of the other, draw names out of the hat type of things that have been suggested.
So, is it possible? Is it what's the percentage of the vote from ownership, from membership? Is it just a simple majority? Is it possible that the commissioner and the competition committee came up with this and the owners reject it? Is that feasible, Tom?
Rules changes always require the supermajority, so you need 24 to enact the rule. But this is also on a one-year basis. It's unclear, frankly, Rich. There's a lot of this that's unclear. Could you end up with a modification? Could somebody propose, a different version of it? Or if there's substantial pushback on certain elements of this, could that change? All of that is possible. There's also, there's some inconsistencies here, too, that I think have been pointed out. For instance, if the Bills and Bengals met in a divisional playoff game and they ended up with the same record based on this weekend's games, the Bengals would host that. It wouldn't be at a neutral site. The Bengals would host based on the strength of victory tiebreaker. The neutral site only applies to a potential championship game. And same thing with the Bengals and the Ravens. If the Ravens somehow this weekend end up in the 5 seed, and there are, again, in those lengthy scenarios sent by NFL Research, there are scenarios with that, they would play the AFC South winner. But if they were to win and somewhere down the line in a divisional game or a championship game, the Bengals and the Ravens ended up facing each other, there's no coin flip. That would only apply to the wild card round. So there's all these different things, and I think that as much as the Bengals, I think everyone would agree, did all the right things in terms of how they handled Monday night, you can certainly understand where a team is not going to be happy about a rule change that potentially, even though they have, by virtue of win percentage, already clinched the AFC North, they potentially then will play a harder schedule next year. They will have a lower draft pick, and they will not get to host a playoff game.
Wow. Oh my gosh! I know that I see your reaction, TJ. You're like, "What?" I mean, but this is why we have you on here, Tom, as well. Tom Pelissero on the Rich Eisen Show. Let's talk about the neutral site AFC Championship game. Based on the way I'm reading it, you tell me if I'm reading this correctly. That the only way that the Chiefs will have a neutral site AFC Championship game unless they're taking on the winner of the AFC South or any of the teams that would make it as a wild card. If it's Cincinnati or if it's Buffalo, they're going to end up having to go to a neutral site to play an AFC Championship game. And if the Bills and Bengals play one another in an AFC Championship game, that will be in either Buffalo or Cincinnati, depending on the results, I would imagine, of this weekend's contests and where these teams wind up in the standings with an actual two teams that have an actual same number of games being played in the regular season, right? Did I get that right, Tom?
Well, let's start with the clean scenarios.
Yes.
At this point, I'm rooting for just for all of our sanity. If the Bills win and the Chiefs lose this weekend, Bills get the 1 seed. They're got the first round bye. AFC Championship game between Bills-Chiefs would be in Buffalo. Flip that around. Chiefs win. Bills lose. Chiefs get all the normal benefits of the number 1 seed, including hosting the AFC Championship game. If they both win, that's where, based upon the possibility they could have finished with the same record, even though they played an uneven number of games, that could go to a neutral site AFC Championship game. There also are, again, so there's scenarios here where you could have that matchup being Kansas City, Buffalo, or at a neutral site. There is also one scenario where the Bengals and Chiefs would be at a neutral site. That only happens if, brace yourself, the Raiders beat the Chiefs, the Patriots beat the Bills, the Bengals beat the Ravens, by which then the Bengals end up in the number 2 seed, and they are a half game back of the Chiefs. That would trigger a neutral site AFC Championship game if it's the Chiefs against the Bengals. Every other scenario where it's the Chiefs versus the Bengals, that's going to be in Kansas City. And then, yes, you're right. Any of those other games with the lower-seeded teams, the neutral site doesn't come into play. It would be normal. And, again, based on the past couple of years, you'd say there's a decent chance that somebody seeded 4 through 7 may make all this moot by the time we get to that last weekend in January.
All right. And then there's the thorny issue of where's the neutral site. Any idea what they're talking about right now?
They're still, as of, when we were gathering information last night, they were still very much going through the logistics. I mean, you have to think through a lot of different things here. One being what stadiums are available. And our colleague Ian Rappaport tweeted earlier today that the Lions Stadium, for instance, Ford Field, which would be a natural, middle ground for a potential game, is not available because they're replacing their turf because they could make the playoffs depending on the results this weekend, but they, cannot host a playoff game. So they were already planning to rip the turf out. That's going to take a while. So that building is not available. Indianapolis, you would think, makes sense. Atlanta makes sense. They also have not taken off the table, from what I'm told, the possibility a neutral site could be an outdoor stadium. All 3 of the teams impacted here, between the Chiefs, the Bills, the Bengals, they're all outdoor teams. Cold weather teams, certainly in Cincinnati and Buffalo, and certain times a year in Kansas City as well. So it would not be completely out of the realm of possibility that, and I'm not saying that this has been discussed as a possibility, but can you imagine an AFC Championship game at Lambeau Field or a setting like that?
Oh, my
That's
goodness.
not, completely off the table either. You also got to figure out, all these big events, normally you've got some type of lead time and you know what the possibilities are.
Yeah.
In a neutral site with flights and hotel rooms for 2 fan bases and everything else, there's a lot that they have to explore besides just whether or not the stadium's available.
Well, that's why you'd have to choose a possible spot now, right? And then block off hotel rooms now that you either, you tell them, hey, what would the cancellation fee be, right? and you'd block it off now, and then you'd have to really turn the machines on, to use the Trading Places phrase, the minute the divisional playoffs are over. And then you'd have to send somebody to a town, or you wouldn't, and you'd cancel all those plans. And I just find it fascinating, and this is going to be a conversation I think that we're going to have later on in this program, is that, these teams that are all involved are all outdoor teams. Shouldn't this game be played outdoors? Or do you just do it like a Super Bowl and just say weather is a non-factor, let's throw them in somewhere indoors? And can't Detroit just, push back the whole turf replacement? I wouldn't Detroit want to host? Wouldn't the city want to host an AFC Championship game?
You ever tried to reschedule your carpet guy, Rich? It's just a big process. You got to book those guys on months in advance. It takes a while. Selfishly, as somebody who may or may not be at that game, I kind of root that it's in a place like New Orleans and not in in Green Bay, where I really should check and see if the hotel rooms have already been jacked up from $89 a night to $900 a night. That'll give us a pretty good indication if anything's being considered there.
You want to know? You want to know something? By the way, you want to know something that would be totally wild? Okay, and I'll just throw it out here. If you want to play outdoors, okay, and let's just say don't you want to play somewhere that would be easy for the fan bases to get to, right? So you'd have to play outdoors. So why not Chicago if it's Kansas City versus Cincinnati, right? Or why not? How about this one? If it's Buffalo and it's Cincinnati, they would play in their respective spots.
New England.
You send Buffalo fans to New England if it's them versus.
No, I want it indoors in Indy.
Right.
I want a Super Bowl type atmosphere because I want to see these teams with amazing offenses. I want to see a high scoring game.
So, I mean, you'd have to choose a place that is geographically sound for the fan bases to get to, wouldn't you? Right, Tom?
Right, you would think so. And that's where I'm saying not that Green Bay would be considered because it's a really hard place. There's not direct flights from anywhere there outside of, I believe, Minneapolis, Chicago, and maybe one other place.
Right.
But let's also remember this. Like, if we get through the weekend, there's a bunch of different scenarios here where there is no neutral site game. I mean, if Kansas City wins and Buffalo loses, there's no neutral site. If Bills win and the Chiefs lose, there is no neutral site. There's a lot of different versions of this. I would certainly imagine that they're, depending, again, how this vote goes, let's get by the vote as well and see whether or not this all ends up passing. But if it does, you may get to Monday and this was all a lot of work for no particular reason. But honestly, I do give credit to people for trying to come up with creative solutions to this, even if some of the teams, namely the Bengals, are not real thrilled with the creativity right now.
All right, before I let you go, big game obviously for Philadelphia this weekend. They needed to win it to just secure the 1 seed in the least dramatic way possible. And then we're talking about the Ravens having an opportunity to get up to the 5 seed or maybe even the 3 seed, and then we're coin flipping and all that business. And Lamar Jackson is, I mean, what's going on with him? Start with him and then give me a Hurts update, if you don't mind, Tom.
When Lamar Jackson hasn't practiced in over a month, everybody continues to say that they expect him to be back when you get to the playoffs. But it's important to keep in mind here, they initially believed that Lamar was going to be back in a couple of weeks. They were not thinking it was going to be a 5-week absence. And given that this game, again, depending on the results of this vote today, could be massively important, or 50-50 chance being massively important for the Ravens, you would like to be at full strength. But it's not as if they're going to, dust Lamar Jackson off when he's missed 15 consecutive practices and then 4 games and say you're going to go out there and play on Sunday. Until he gets back on the field, we really don't know where he's at with that knee. Even if, he's going to go out there, is he going to be Lamar Jackson, or is he going to look like the Lamar Jackson who came out for one practice when he was dealing with that bone bruise in his ankle last year and was, not even able to bend his legs and was kind of limping around the field, and we never saw him again? We'll have to see when we get to next week. But again, the Ravens have consistently said they anticipate he is going to be out there. And then as for the Eagles with Jalen Hurts, he's been pushing to play really since the start of this. Hurts' original thought, his hope was 1 week absence, get back out there. The Eagles have taken the cautious route medically. He's got an SC joint sprain, which is right where your sternum connects to your collarbone here. It's not a common injury that you see a ton in quarterbacks, but it's something that if this were the Super Bowl this week, if it were a playoff game, we'd see Hurts out there. Nick Sirianni said today everything is trending the right direction, and now it just comes down to, if he does play, how much do they expose him? Is he the running threat that he normally is? Are they cautious knowing that they're hoping to get a deep playoff run in? You certainly don't want to give up the number 1 seed because there is no question in the NFC what that means. It's a first-round playoff bye and home field all the way through the NFC playoffs.
Tom, you're the man. Thanks for the time. Greatly appreciated, brother. Thank you.
You got it, Rich. Thanks.
You bet. That's Tom Pelissero. Bless him, man. Does he know everything off the top of his head or what? Catch the Rich Eisen Show every single day on the Roku channel, 12 to 3 Eastern, for free.